Nintendo's stock continues to slide. Could slow Switch sales be to blame? Let's talk about it. Hello my friends, it's July 4th, 2018, and today's big story focuses on Nintendo's stock and the slide that's been happening for a number of months now. It was going on before E3, it went on during E3, it continues in recent weeks, and investors and analysts want to know why. So Nikkei and their investors have been talking about the matter, and they've come up with two potential reasons. First off, I do want to say Nintendo stock recently was at a 9-year high and has been sliding from that, so stock is still very high compared to what it was in recent years, but it's having a noticeable drop. First reason the investors are thinking that the stock is sliding is because the Switch isn't selling as well. Now, when you compare the first fiscal year, or the first 3 fiscal months of the fiscal year for Switch, compared to this fiscal year's first 3 months, obviously you would think that the system's not going to sell as well, because we're talking about launch sales versus 3 months into the second year of the system. So you had Breath of the Wild, and you had just the launch of the system in general, and the frenzy that was around it. The combination of Switch and Breath of the Wild together made for all kinds of craziness, and people everywhere were trying to get their hands on a Switch. And it was sold out all over the world, especially in Japan. They were hosting lotteries where you would get in line and hopefully your number would be called and you could get a system, just because there weren't that many to go around. So yes, I would expect sales to be slow, more slow compared to the first 3 months of last fiscal year to this fiscal year. That just makes sense. But is there cause for concern and a big dip in Switch sales? All I can tell you is that for May 2018, the Switch's sales were higher than they were in May 2017, at least in the United States. And as I said, stock was limited back then, so you would hope sales were higher, and they were. Switch was the second best-selling system overall in the United States. It sold somewhere around 180,000 units. And it had the #1 best-selling hardware SKU, which was the neon blue and red Joy-Con Switch set. PS4 was the overall best-selling, and Xbox One was below both of them. So the system is certainly selling. I don't know if you'd say it's selling as well as it was last year, because I don't have all the data for worldwide numbers, but yes, you're comparing launch to a year in, so I don't know how much of a fair comparison it is, but if we're seeing major declines, that would be something to worry about. Nintendo's not going to release those sales details until a little bit later this month. They'll be reporting on their first quarter of the new fiscal year, so we'll get that 3 months of data and see where the Switch is at. And then the other reason that investors and analysts are saying the Switch or Nintendo stock is dropping is because Nintendo hasn't really been forthcoming with what's going on with the Switch as far as software goes. They said they didn't really have a really impactful E3. They didn't really have any surprises. They announced things before E3 even happened, and it left the E3 show a little bit barren. And Nintendo is just kind of quiet overall, not only about what's going on with Switch later this year, but also years to come. They think people, or potential consumers, want to know not only what's coming this year, but what is, you know, further out, like other companies do. Sony and Microsoft show off a lot of things that are 2019, 2020. I mean, we're talking about presentations from Sony and Microsoft that have been showing games for their platforms for like 3 years running straight at E3 that still aren't out yet. I personally like Nintendo showing things closer to launch better, but that's just me. And then on top of that, I could say Nintendo is rather quiet with their overall picture for the full year. Just yesterday, Nintendo said that there's still other titles coming out to this on the Switch in 2018 that they haven't talked about yet. So you're like, if you weren't doing it at E3, and you didn't do it before E3, when are you going to do it? Is there going to be like another Nintendo Direct? But like, why? I don't understand. I understand their approach to showing what's coming out at during the year, but I don't understand how they figure out when they're going to break it up. I guess they feel certain titles need to be highlighted at different times, and certain titles should be discussed more closely to their launch. I don't know. But yes, Nintendo always is a drip feed of information with their games. But 2018 in particular, you think after coming off such a strong year with the Switch, they'd be like, boom, bam, here's all these titles. These are coming out this year, and here's a couple more that are coming out next year. Instead, it was, hey, here's some titles you already knew about, and some of the other titles you thought were coming this year aren't. They're coming in 2019. So you could see how that might make people unhappy, and then investors and analysts would read into that stuff and say, here, this is the reason why stock is dropping. So both of those reasons are certainly plausible. Boomerang Slash on Go Nintendo says, I think the current game releases have been just fine, as there's been plenty to play. But information on upcoming titles is really beginning to be a problem. They have to be more forthcoming with what's ahead, simple as that. We just don't know enough right now. I think one emergency direct would fix all of this. I'm sure there's going to be another direct this year, and yes, with Nintendo saying there's other titles in 2018 we don't know about, that's where we're going to find out about them, I would imagine. So that I think it's a sure thing that another direct is coming before we get to the close of the year. But yeah, I also feel like there's plenty to play on Switch. There's, what are we at, over 700 games or something like that? There's certainly plenty of games to play. I don't want to say there's plenty of first-party games to play because there's a certain cadence to those, but Nintendo has put out stuff, and third parties are getting more on board with the system, and indie developers have been there since day one, and there's in my opinion, there is a ton of content. And we're seeing that Switch owners are supporting that because these developers, specifically indie developers, when their games come out, they say the Switch version is selling the best by a large margin. That happens almost every week. We hear an indie developer say, our game came out on PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Switch, and the Switch version is doing the best by far. So I know consumers are supporting those games. It just happened with Fox and Forest. The development team for that game said the Switch version was outselling the PS4 version 4-1. And the PC version 3-1. Switch was the best-selling version above all of them. So yeah, consumers or owners of the Switch are certainly supporting that stuff. So I do feel there's plenty of games to play. But yes, we need to know more. It's not always about like, hey, this game's coming out in a couple weeks or this game's coming out in a couple months. We want to know like, you're going to have stuff to play for a long time to come. Even if it's stuff like Nintendo did with Metroid Prime 4. They were just like, here's a logo, the game is in development. That did wonders for Nintendo, made fans really happy. Obviously, they did it because they also announced Metroid Samus Returns for the 3DS, and they knew if they just announced the 3DS version, fans would slaughter them and be like, we don't want a remake on 3DS, we want Metroid Prime 4. So Nintendo had to throw that in there and then later announce Samus Returns to get a warmer welcome for that. Totally understand it. But there's plenty of other titles Nintendo could do that with, even if it's a little bit more than a logo, some artwork or something. There's no doubt that they know of third-party things that are going on, and obviously their own stuff they could show, whatever, but Nintendo likes to keep that stuff very close to their heart and very close to their vest, and they just don't show it. And sometimes it's just like, boom, here's a game, it's coming out tomorrow, or it's coming out next week, and you're like, oh, I wish I had some more time to learn about this, but we don't, so we're going to see what happens from here on out. Maybe Nintendo's looking at this stock situation being like, we have to address things differently. But, you know, Nintendo always likes to act like Nintendo, so they do their own thing. Alright, my friends, that's today's big story for July 4th, 2018. Thanks for watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting. It's very much appreciated. I'll be back tomorrow for whatever tomorrow's big story is, and I sure hope you'll join me to check it out. So until then, have a lovely day, have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in a few short hours. Hey guys, RMC here from Go Nintendo. If you like what you saw in the video, why don't you give us a thumbs up and maybe even subscribe? We'd love to have you. If you want to see what else we're up to, you can check out GoNintendo.com for 24-hour Nintendo news. You can visit us on Facebook at Facebook.com/GoNintendo. You can check us out on Twitter at Twitter.com/GoNintendoTweet. And we're even over on Instagram at Instagram.com/GoNintendo. I put all the links in the description just to make it easier for you guys to follow. Thanks a lot.